much for joining me today on this one of our first webinars. So it's called You Survived, Now How Do You Thrive? I built this webinar as a response to a lot of questions, a lot of issues that I've had raised over the last few weeks, and obviously as a result of COVID-19, I thought it'd be worthwhile getting it together, getting a group of people together, and sharing some of the things that we've learned throughout this whole response. Some quick overviews, and I've seen some questions that are coming through there around what we've got here. We are in a webinar format for Zoom, which means that most of the time you'll be on mute. There'll be opportunities where we can unmute participants. But what we've got is really two key functions that we want you to look into today. First and foremost, so before we get into that, we're going to actually use, there's a link here that you've got on the page. And I'm going to get Mel to share that into the chat box down here. She's just done that there now. So it's called, that's a remote brainstorming document. It's a Google Doc that will be sort of aiming to punch a bit of data into as we go throughout the presentation. And then we'll have a pause, we'll move to that to show you how to do a bit of remote brainstorming. So if you make sure you got that ready to go in the background, and I'll bring it up on the screen and could share some of your findings. It'll be a test run on that, so we'll see how it goes, but it's a good opportunity to try that out. In the chat function, a lot of you are used to it now. I can see some messages are coming through at the moment on it. And in particular, we just need to make sure that you go and call out all panelists and all attendees. And then as a little test of objectives, you want to put your name in, put your industry, your role, and really what you're hoping to learn today. So, or if there's anything we can take out of today, I'd love to hear from you, from what that may look like. If you've got any questions as we're going throughout the day, though, or throughout the presentation, I ask that you go into the Q&A box. So the Q&A box will be monitored by Mel, and we'll pause at different parts throughout the presentation just to reflect on those questions and answering those questions as we're going along. So yes, I can see a number of familiar faces. We can see it's all coming through, and obviously we're going to be recording this. So we'll record this so you can have access to all this and all the other materials and some other resources I'm excited to share with you today. So just a few quick ones that are coming through. I can see I've got Simon Hawken, one of the great mentors of mine early days from when I was platoon commander. Great to see you or hear you on the other end of the line, mate, and thanks very much for your support over the journey. Richard Turner, another great supporter recently, so thank you, Richard, for joining us. Claire Glegorn, she's the CEO of Bastion, one of the panelists that I've had on the Crisis Talks podcast. And she's keen to hear about ideas for revival and recovery for businesses. Kel, an old friend and colleague from the Dynamic days, still with Dynamic, so he'll be listening on the other front to see what's going on now, left of Boom, but nonetheless, great to have you on board, mate. And a few other names, familiar faces. Stacey Nation, Stacey Daly now, great to reconnect, mate, and no doubt a very challenging time in the travel industry space, and particularly for you guys down in Tassie. I trust and hope that you're all, and the rest of your family, are really well too. So as we're going through the presentation, guys, there'll be opportunities to pause and take Q&As, etc. there, and I'll be sure to do that as we're going throughout. What you should expect to see today is we're going to talk a little bit about really about planning through uncertainty and leading through uncertainty. And in particular on the planning front, I want to walk you through a bit of a methodology called ADAPT, which is a mnemonic for a different planning process that's really emerged from a lot of the work that I've done recently in some of the different responses that I've been involved in. I'll talk a little bit about cognitive bias, and Bill, if he gets a chance to join us, in particular, has been one of the real insights, or one of the leaders that I've sort of turned to understand a bit more about that. So I'll talk a little bit about cognitive bias and the effect that it has on our decision-making methodology, particularly when we're under duress. I'm looking at some remote brainstorming. We are working in this new normal at the moment of technology, remote workspaces, and in particular remote crisis teams. So I want to share with you some different ideas or insights into how you can use technology still to manage the crisis, but also not being managed by the crisis itself or the impact on your own work-life balance. A few others are still joining you. Helen Rathbone, again, an old connection from a long time back. Great to see you on board, and Wayne Taylor, great as always to see you too, mate. So, all right. Some of the resources that we'll have, I said already before, we'll have a copy of this presentation and a recording of the presentation. Some other stuff that I'm really excited to share, some new stuff that I've been working on, and also some other planning resources for you, along with the podcast, etc. as well. So And for some of you who don't know me or haven't been familiar with what I've been doing recently, then the podcast has been one of the key things that I've been doing over the last year as part of the New Business Left to Boom. And it's meant that I've had the opportunity to interview a number of awesome people that have been through real crises and hear their stories of resilience and adversity, and resilience in the face of adversity, and see the way that they've adapted to different situations. So the podcast is available on all those normal sort of channels that you'd go to for your podcasts. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it lately, we've been focusing a bit more on COVID-19 in particular, and ways that organisations can prepare, respond, or also look at different ways to manage themselves through it. I've been an advisor for best on 15 years now in crisis management, and I suppose more recently we've seen the impacts both of the fires before Christmas and over Christmas, rolling into a global cyber attack, which some of you will be familiar with, obviously, and then obviously with the overlap now with COVID-19. So it's been a pretty frantic start to the year in terms of the crisis support. Overlay that with things such as tropical cyclone Harold over the last few weeks in the Southwest Pacific. It's been pretty well unprecedented sort of times. So again, today's really an amalgam of those different lessons that I've learned from across those different incidents, and some of the different planning methodologies that I've used over the journey. Some key tools, if you like. One is going to be a pen or a pencil, in this case for me, some post-it notes, a notebook if you've got it, so you can take some notes down as we're going through. But like I said, some of these resources will be made available to you as well after the session, so I'll send them all to you. So you don't need to take notes about specifically what's up on screen, but no doubt things will prompt in your own mind, and it's always good to carry the notebook around. I love a whiteboard. I might turn to that as we're going throughout. As you can see, I also talk with my hands a lot, so look forward to getting into it and answering any questions we're going through. What some of you may not know about me, apart from maybe Stacey, is that when we were growing up down in New Norfolk, myself and a lot of our mates, Stacey's brother in particular, we used to love going out on the water, and particularly used to love going tubing. And tubing was awesome, particularly down in New Norfolk, because we had this amazing stretch of river on the Derwent. There were some low-grade rapids in certain sections, and some really steady flow rolling all the way through. It's a real lifeline for the whole community down there. And rivers are a great analogy, if you like, for resilience and adaptation. But in this case here, we would love the fact that we get out there, in a beautiful day, in our wetsuits, take a tube out of a tyre, grab a stick and a few ropes and stuff like that. We'd go and plan out our trip, get our parents to drop us a few k's down the river, just past the really difficult section of the rapids. So we'd avoid that, but then we'd plan our trip and then work away, meandering down the river. Really exhilarating, great fun. And at the end of the day, it was safe. And the reason why it was safe, because we used a risk management approach really to how we're going to plan and go about it. So we had the tube, we had a wetsuit, we had buoyancy, we had ropes and sticks in case we needed to stay connected or reach out to people who might have been in distress. We knew the grades of the rapids, so it wasn't too risky. And we also looked at the weather and other sort of aspects to make sure we planned it properly. So we had a good plan for dealing with uncertainty if it came about. If something happened, we were all strong swimmers, so we had some really good methodologies in place. And it's easy to do that when you know the environment, and it's easy to adapt to an environment when you know what it is. And adapting to environments is a really great analogy that we talk about with rivers and flow, and in particular the lifelines that they provide to communities. So as an analogy for resilience, rivers always seem to be a great go-to in that space. The challenge we find with a threat like COVID-19 is that it really comes into us and onto us like a storm. And the problem is we're faced with this rapidly evolving situation, like rapids, which we don't know, unfortunately, the duration or extent or length. So unlike us when we were planning our tubing trips, we knew that we'd have these short sections which we'd have to navigate through. And at the end, we'd have this exhilaration. Right now, we're faced with real uncertainty. So the difficulty in planning and uncertainty is really working out ways, working out what the future may hold and understanding what that future may look like in order to move our way forward towards an outcome. That's very difficult when we're overwhelmed, and we're overwhelmed on a number of different fronts at the moment. So options that we're presented with in those circumstances are either we swim harder, so we all become Michael Phelps all of a sudden. So over the last few weeks with the workload lifting, everyone's just swimming harder and harder and harder to try and get through that immediate wildstorm that sort of hit us like a tsunami. But none of us can really sustain that because none of us are Michael Phelps, obviously. We can build a bigger raft, so we can build a bigger boat to deal with that wild river. We can group together, we can huddle up, we can build a team that's going to help us navigate our way through it. But that takes effort, it takes time, it takes choice, it takes funding, it takes resources and stuff that we don't have. We can dam it. So another way of dealing with that threat is by building something or changing the environment. So we can build a bridge, we can build a dam, we can get over it, we can stop it, we can stem the flow. All those sort of options are available to you when you've got plenty of capital, you've got plenty of time, which none of us fully understand what we've got at the moment. So all these options mean that most of the time we're looking for a lifeline. And unfortunately, lifelines at this stage means that we're effectively drowning. So, and I've really got to throw to everyone at the moment. So I'm going to try and use the poll at this point in time. So there's going to be a poll that will come up on the screen. And those that are, I'm keen to see what you're feeling about the whole environment at the moment. Do you feel like you're drowning? Do you feel like you're surviving? So you're just sort of keeping your head above water at the moment, but you're really working ultra hard to keep in that state. Are you steady? You're through that immediate storm and now just starting to emerge? Or are you thriving, which would be interesting. So I'm going to put the poll up on the screen there and see how we go. So just give everyone a moment there to work through the poll and put your results in and see what your thoughts are. So interesting. So the stats coming through, phenomenal. 17 out of 29 so far voted. Mel, can you see that up on your screen, the results? $22 of 30 so far. Let's give it a few more seconds there and we'll wrap it up. And poll, share the results. Okay, here we go. So Kel just said we couldn't see the results. They're coming up now. So can we see them again now there, Kel? Now we can, yep, excellent. So you can see two out of the, how many results did we get? We had about, can count, 24 polls there. So 42% surviving, 50% of that sort of steady state, and 8% thriving, which is actually pleasing to see. It'd be interesting to see those that are thriving. Which industries are those guys in that we're thriving? Just throw it into the chat box down the left there. If you're thriving, which industries are you currently working in that's really thriving at the moment? So it gives you a good indication then about the pleasing thing that from that straw poll there is we can see that a lot of us are either in that surviving mode or that steady mode. But you can see there's a lot of challenges there to get into that thriving state. So today's sort of approach is really talking a bit about a methodology that you can help work through that sort of challenge or that uncertainty and understand options that you can pick. Because when you're under duress and when you're under pressure, when you're really fighting to survive, then the cognitive burden of you becomes so high that it's very difficult to make the right choices. So you're naturally going to go for the easiest option, which in many cases is the survival mode or the lifeline. So creating space for everyone and time and space for everyone is really what planning is all about. Otherwise, we're all stuck in this work mode like Tank off the Matrix, where we're all just tuning into the Matrix at the moment. Whole heap of activity, whole lot of meetings back to back to back, crisis meetings interlaced with business as usual meetings, all that sort of stuff, which makes it really challenging. And we get this situation where instead of just flattening the curve from the medical side of the fence, we actually need to flatten the curve from our own work balance. And planning enables you to do that. So Planning means that you can start to think ahead through the situation. But that again is difficult to comprehend when you're stuck with that cognitive burden, which a lot of us are facing at the moment. So back into the Thrive pyramid in the way that it sort of stands up, part of the way to get through that is actually by working out ways that you can create time and space, create some concurrent activity, and enable yourself the cognitive capacity to start working through to what the next phase of this whole thing would look like. And adapt as a mnemonic actually really becomes an interesting way to look at it, because it's a 5-step process, which I'll sort of talk you through in a sec. And when you break down the word adapt, it really comes in 2 parts. The prefix, which is ad, it implies moving forward, again like the river, that sort of forward motion. And apt means that it's appropriate and it's fitting for whatever it is. So adapting implies that we're moving forward through this whole problem. And so it worked out as a great mnemonic. And I love mnemonics at the best of times because they're great ways to trigger memories for us, particularly when you're working through situations. And hopefully it's a good mnemonic that you can use in your own planning. The key points with plans, though, is that as we've quickly found with all of these disasters, every plan that I think I've written prior to the end of year, it's effectively been thrown out the window. Some of them have formed excellent bases for further planning, whether it be initial business continuity plans, workforce planning, stuff like that, which identifies critical workers. That's worked out really effectively to help either in cyber attack or even in situations where we're looking now at critical workers or essential workers as part of the workforce planning for COVID. So they've helped, but equally the challenges each time are slightly different, which means that you've got to keep planning, you've got to keep working through. As soon as you stop, then you die. And we don't want to be drowning, we want to be working forward through. So planning enables you to get through that. And whichever process you're looking at, there's a few key principles which I'll walk you through. And so for the adapt process itself, the first part of it is really about assessing the situation. It's about really understanding what this all means and getting stuff down on paper. And I can't emphasize that enough. The planning in any sort of methodology here, or if you're confronted with any sort of problem, actually taking out the notebook and pen or a few post-it notes and writing down what the problems are helps you to really start to frame it. So assessing the situation becomes a critical part to understand what are all the issues, what's the changes that are being imposed on us, what potentially may come down the track, and start to understand what the impact is having on us. The D is for designing or developing scenarios. This is brainstorming 101. So what scenarios, what issues does this present? What risks does it present? And importantly, what opportunities does a situation like this present? Brendan, who looks into wealth advice, they're obviously M&A activities are going to start going through the roof. We've seen the activity around Virgin over the last few days. So those sort of opportunities start to plan out when you start to look at what the future prospects may look like. You may not have the capacity to do that. So either way, we're looking at designing and developing options that you can start to work through. The next day is really about analysing those different courses of action. So analysing those options and applying whatever lens that you want to put on it. So if it's a financial lens, a timing lens, whatever they are, it's really about looking at the those different scenarios, identifying what the options are around those, and ensuring that you're aiming to pick what are the best 1, 2, or 3 options that you're going to go with that you can actually build into more detailed plans. There's another little, we used to call it FASD. So Dave Wilton, who's on here, will remember he taught me what FASD is actually, which is feasible, acceptable, sustainable, and distinguishable. So you want to try and develop different options that are quite distinguishable. I've turned that into another adapt anyway. So achievable, distinguishable, actionable. So we want to have proactive plans that are actionable, and we don't want to be timely. So it's another way to look at it, or another lens you can throw over it. It's more of a play again on the adapt wording. The P is really about picking, priming, and preparing. So picking the appropriate course of action, working what you need to do to prime yourself or prime your market or prime your team, shaping that space that you're going to be operating within. And then at the end of the day, what do you need to do to prepare your workforce or otherwise, or your business, to align to those new opportunities? And last but definitely not least is the triggers or timings. So That really refers to the what are going to be the foreseeable preconditions that you can target to actually trigger your decisions. You may not know, for example, when the restrictions are going to ease, but you may say that if they ease to a certain level, then the impact on us will be it'll take us a week, 2 weeks to restart, or it'll take us X amount of time to recommence. So it's really about looking at what those triggers are so that you can start to align your decisions and either preempt those triggers as you start to see the conditions change, or you can react very quickly when they do. So adapt becomes a process, and it's really an iterative process. And there's a few key points about this, because some of you will be looking at this going, well, what the hell does this mean to me? Because I'm a small business owner and I've got no idea about this. And I don't have the capacity, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, whatever. Others will be going, yeah, we're doing it, we nailed it, we've got a team that's working on it. The point is that it's a process, you know, and processes help you work through the next step. So trusting in the process helps you to work out what the opportunities may look like and take a more objective view. It means that we're cutting away that cognitive bias. You can do it as an individual. So if you know that you're biased towards optimism, then you could obviously take a more red team approach, or a more negative approach to your risk management. So you might say lower tolerance for risk, higher because I'm a higher optimist. So I need to make sure that my risk processes are really high in this case, or otherwise I'm going to take an option which will be too risky and it will end up costing me down the track. You can use a team to work through it, and it can be a quick process or it can be a deliberate process. So you can do it in very quick time, and we're going to walk through that very shortly, or you can take your own time, or you can build it out over time to work through it. So it's a quick or deliberate or an individual or group process, it doesn't really matter. It's iterative. So the 1/3, 2/3 rule is one of those important rules that we used to use around planning versus execution. So the time that we're taking planning would be 1/3 of the time and space that we would have to execute, and the 2/3 would be then dedicated to our preparation and our troops and getting everything in order. So we wanted to get that current activity happening. So you don't want to take 2/3 of your time to come up with a plan and leave 1/3 to execution, or you end up like Tank the Matrix and we're no longer flattening the curve anymore. We're just rolling on reactive without any sort of cognitive space. And the other important step with all of this, or an important consideration with all of this, is that it's got to be action biased. So you've got to be considering, you know, different options very quickly, and you've got to look at ways you can rapidly test or rapidly experiment your way through them. So all those things mean that we've got a forward focused view, and we're continually working through the cycle to assess, reassess, and analyze and iterate and develop and further work on the situation. So that gives us a bit of a view on the sort of methodology. Sorry to scroll through. What we're going to do is get you to go into the document now. There's the link that I've attached there for you, and I'm just going to have to go off this for a second. Should be able to bring it up on the screen, and I'll just see if there's any. Mel, if you want to, if there's any Q&As that we've got there at the moment, then just let me know. What you can do is, if you bring up that link, we're actually, and you can see some of you in it already, which is fantastic. So what we want to do is, using the situation as it stands for you and for your business, go in and just tap in, you know, what's your assessment of the situation? So throw a few dot points in there about what you see as a situation. And I'll share it up on the screen here, and we can continue to call out some of those. So what does the situation mean for you? What are the impacts it's having on it? What's the effect it's creating for you? What does it mean in your environment at the moment? So if we were to assess the situation really quickly. So you should be able to just type in your own. You can add a new line if you need to. Yeah, 2-speed, fast and slow economy. We're really looking at that at the moment. We've got a lot of people either at high demand that are, you know, in particularly sometimes in retail, obviously in shopping centres and those sort of things. Logistics, obviously in the supply chain, supporting them, and you've got others that are in complete shutdown. So the travel industry in particular. So Stacey, no doubt it would be a challenge that you guys are facing around international travel, international bookings, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's fast. everyone's having to really rapidly adapt to the fast changing situation. So my wife works at JLL, which is a manager of shopping centres and retail. Every time they changed one of the parameters around who was going to be enabled to continue operating, hairdressers as an example, there was 50 stores that they had to go and put signage through and change signage out for and everything else. So it actually made it very challenging to manage those sort of things. So the cause and effect and the constant iteration means that it's really tough to manage and assess situation. Socioeconomic conditions, absolutely. You can see that they're really starting to deteriorate. If you want to shift focus into the develop options, what are the options that starts to present to you and others in your sector? So again, just a rapid data burst of things. And whilst we're putting those out there, this is one way of rapidly brainstorming through a problem. Normally, when you're in a crisis room, you might have one person up on the whiteboard writing something down, 10 people shouting at them. They can only write one thing down at a time. You're taking a lot of time to really work through the different options. The purpose in this whole process is to actually really get things down very quickly. And what you'll find, hopefully, when you do this is you can start to frame them together, or you'll see common themes or common threads that you want to start to line up. So it's where your post-it notes can really come into play, and you can have different post-it notes for different issues. You can group them together and move them around the board. You can then start to look at options that will address each of those as well. New products we're seeing as one of the options. We're seeing SME support service trying to get ahead, all those sort of things. When we're looking at the analyze options, it's difficult to do in this environment here, but what you're looking at when you're looking at analyzing options, I'll show you an example of this up on the screen shortly, and you'll get a copy of this, which is a bit of a download of all the different assessments I've been looking at over the last few weeks. The analyze options is always probably the more challenging part, because the lenses which you apply to analyze those options may differ based on your own situation. So, whether you've got access to capital, whether you don't, whether you're in a debt problem, or whether you've got a market constraint for other different factors, where you've got other regulatory considerations that you might impose. So you need to look at all those options as part of your assessment and your analysis on what you're going to do or which one you're going to pick. Applying that lens becomes really critical to enabling you to pick an option that's going to work for you and it's going to be apt for the solution that you want to adapt to. So that's just a little snapshot, guys, on how to do a rapid brainstorming activity, which you can do pretty readily, and it's a pretty basic sort of experiment. No doubt you'll have other tools that you use, whether it be Teams, whether it be SharePoint or others. It's a good way to go to get some rapid input from multiple sources whilst you're working remotely through a problem. I'll get back into the presentation so we can pause off that, and I can show you some different ways of then looking at it, so and breaking that up. So let me go back into here. So one of the first things to look at there is the immediate action plan. I've got a template like that that I'll share with you after this. So you can see it's a top-down view: assess, design, develop, etc., etc. So that's not a bad way to sort of structure it up for yourself. So you're looking, in a column or a line view, or you can look, as I've done with this one here, you look at it in a time and space view. So, and I've really done a sort of as I was saying before, a bit of an amalgam of what we're looking at for the future. In particular, and just been an amalgam of the different ones I've brought from different clients. So you can see with this one here, the intent was to look at the impacts now, look at it in a month, quarter, year, and future. So it's called time boxing. So the whole idea here is you're creating an assessment of the situation in time and space, and looking at different factors that might be at play at that particular point in time. All of these things mean that there's different ways you can cut and dice the problem to help give you a really good view on what some solid options are going to look like. And you can see this is a macro assessment that I did, and you can see international movement restrictions. Obviously, as we're coming off, as we're moving through, into the quarter, we'll probably see that the state-based and intra-regional movement will come off. And the year on, peak flu season, we're probably going to see a second phase outbreak unless they go to a zero control here, or we might have a second stage with inbound international travel coming back online. Geopolitical impacts are some of the things that are considered in here. Other considerations around movement, interstate, inter-regions, and everything else has also been factored in. Or in some cases, then some of the longer-term impacts around US and Chinese relations going forward as well. So all of those, though, have to be translated into what it means to you. So what it means to you and your environment, what it means to you and your people, and what it means ultimately to you and your business. The time space ones are a good way of doing it. So just a quick one in the chat box again, and whilst we're doing, I'll check out the Q&A. I can't actually open it up at the moment, sorry Mel, but on the chat box, if you just type in the chat box, what are the other types of lenses that might be applicable for you that you might apply? Sorry, it might be applicable for you to view in that sort of a matrix, in that sort of an adapt matrix. So we've spoken about the time and space matrix. What are some of the other ones that you want to type into the chat box here a bit that might be applicable for you to look at it in a different way? Yeah, Kel's put in a SWOT. SWOT's a ripper. That's a good one, particularly when you're looking at analysing your options. So for step 3, it's actually a really one. Yeah, what is analysis? So throwing that over, or what if analysis is throwing that over any of those options that you put in. I knew what you're getting at, Hawks. It's all right. So what if analysis is another good way to look at it. There's some others that we talk about, whether it be a customer lens, whether we talk about, Claire's talking about traffic light, stop, start, modify. Other ways you can look at it is customer lens. So you might look at the customer impacts. You might look at a market segment. You might look at a financial or a functional or a stream or a particular organism within, or a particular organization or a particular stream within your own organization is what I should have said. De Bono's hat's another good way to look at it too. So a heap of different ways you can apply that same adapt lens to multiple views on the same situation. All that comes down to, though, is what sort of time and space you actually have to perform that analysis. And I often find that a quick analysis of the adapt methodology or a quick planning process, whichever process you want to use, often spins out a lot of the issues that you're going to face anyway. And in that first cut, you'll find that probably most of the problems you can identify. And the key point with these is really just throwing them out there. So don't let your own cognitive bias impact what options you're throwing out there. You need to go with any particular option that might exist in order to explore what might be something you can adapt to in the future. Or ways to avoid that cognitive bias, and there's a few different ways you can do that. As I said with yourself before, you can buddy up with others. You can do red team analysis. You can get others. You're breaking your groups out so you got the right people, or mixing up people that normally wouldn't work together. So you're avoiding groupthink. And key things, like I said, write everything down. Stick it up on a post-it note. Stick it up on a whiteboard. Don't write it off until you put it through the process or put it through the wash. Now, this is where I want to talk a bit more. We've spoken about process now, and we've spoken about what that looks like and how you can work through a particular process to analyze a problem and plan through uncertainty. The other component now is really the impact on you as leaders, the impact on us, and the way that we are conducting ourselves and carrying ourselves throughout a crisis situation. And again, the cognitive overload really comes into play here, because the challenge that a lot of us are facing, a lot of my clients that I've been working with over last month or two in particular, is that they're just getting overloaded with a lot of extra effort in communicating through this. So I really want to walk through some of the things about what you want to do to get rid of, or delete, or discard, what you can do to delegate things to your team and empower them as part of this whole process. And ensure that you're taking the right time, creating the right space to make the big decisions and do what's important, rather than just doing everything and trying to be Michael Phelps and swim your way out of the rapids. Eisenhower matrix is a good one to apply to that. And just a quick assessment yourself each day. What do I need to do today? What's the critical things for me, for my business, that's going to bring success for this business now? And then you can delegate what you don't need to do, or you can make quick decisions and pass it off. Pilots and aircrew do this amazingly, and what they're trying to create there is that headspace, that 30% extra, that 1/3, really, that enables you to focus on the horizon and look at what other risks that this thing may present, or look at, importantly, what other opportunities that this may present. So getting your team around you, not necessarily physically, but virtually, delegating and empowering them with key decisions and ensuring that they have the right support and right access to information becomes really critical. You can't centralize things anymore. We can't have a single control room, crisis room, war room like what we used to do, or we always trained back in the day. Importantly then, adaptive leadership really needs to come into play. And I wrote this article off the back of the fires at the start of this year when I was away on break. I came up with a bit of a model which is really about the things that you need to be, the roles that you need to perform. And I was observing what had happened with Scott Morrison and the expectations that were placed on him, and then therefore the way he reacted to those different environments, with both from Hawaii or otherwise, and then also as he sort of overreached coming back into the whole fire season. So the point that we're making here is that the centre parts is the aim really here is about being that trusted leader. Yeah. So we want to be that person that's trusted in the decisions or in the support that we're providing, or in the way that we're going about our own leadership styles, the values that we want to sort of hold true. And the values that you want to sort of model there, or role model there, is really being proactive, empathetic, and being assuring. So they're the sort of three broad values, and you can break them down further, obviously, but I think empathy is one of those key ones which really brought in that instance there, in that particular situation, it brought the Prime Minister unstuck a bit, because he was blamed for not showing the empathy towards the victims that were impacted by the fires at that point in time. Equally, in this situation now, or if you're applying it to a planning methodology, if you're not empathetic to the situation of your customers, you're not empathetic to your clients, you're not empathetic to the impacts that are going on around you, then you actually won't have a very good view, and you'll be making a decision with that cognitive bias in mind of just charging through, focusing on ourselves, and not really thinking about the opportunities you can adapt towards. Around the outside is the roles, or the situational roles, that a leader will play at different points in time. And I can attribute, I can assure you that at different points in time, I think all of us have got this wrong. I know I certainly have as well. Ego wants us to be the inspirer. We want to be Winston Churchill. We want to be Jacinda Ardern. We want to be those people that are really guiding and leading, and seen as I suppose the bastions, for, if no pun intended there, Claire, of what we would expect from a leader. It's not always the opportunity though to do that, and so we're going to pick the moments when you actually can be inspiring, and you can inspire through other means. You inspire through empathy. You can inspire through vulnerability. And probably a great example of that was Nathan Buckley after the grand final loss last year, when he was saying to the team, in the change, I don't have the answers here, and that vulnerability then inspired his team, and inspired a lot of the community and their members in particular to really get behind them further and galvanise them towards their ultimate goal for who knows when now, unfortunately. The enabler is the person that facilitates, ensures that the wheels are being kept in motion and correctly oiled and greased and everything else, and they're enabling their people to shine. So they're the ones that are pushing them up rather than dragging them along. And the supporter, you don't have to, in a high performance team, you don't have to support every decision. This is not what it's about, but you want to support the person, or you want to support the team. You want to support the team to be better. We want to create an environment where they are benefiting and being better themselves as a result of the work that you're willing to put in and focus on that team. So bringing all those together, both from the planning approach and then into the leadership approach, really helps to shape the way that you want to lead your organisation through. So as an enabler, what are you doing to create that time and space for your team to actually plan through those next challenges? Can you give them extra resources? Can you give them extra empowerment? Can you facilitate extra decision making for them? Is there other ways that you can inspire them remotely while you're working away? Is there other ways that you can show support for them, your clients, or the community? How can you be proactive and engage with them despite being separated physically from them? What can you do to assure them and give them confidence through the plans that you're developing and adapting to the situation? A lot of that comes down to the way that you're communicating and the way that you're actively engaging with your stakeholders, and in particular your own workforce. Without that team coming together to work through the solutions that you're going to adapt to tomorrow or in the new normal, then you really have got no business opportunities to explore. So part of this is about being a bit focused on, obviously, and empathetic to the environment, the customers, and the outcomes, and responding to those accordingly. But at the end of the day, it's also about building the right team and the right structure and the right organisation that's going to take you through and adapt to the new normal. So choosing the right strategy is challenging, but take yourself through the process. Go through an immediate action plan in your own workforce. Brainstorm options, those with your team. Engage with that team about what their issues are. Help them frame the opportunities or the actions that you're going to take. Arbitrary decisions pushed down to people will always be met skeptically, and we all know that, and we don't like that ourselves. So engaging them as much as you can in that process and helping them be empowered to make the decisions for you and support you through it means that you've got already the right engagement to carry your strategy forward. Testing, and I said it before, that focus or action bias is a really critical one, but testing very quickly is even more critical now. You're really looking now at halving the testing cycles that we previously had. The old days of the 90-day sprint cycles, you can see everything's rapidly evolving at the moment. So 90 days, within 6 weeks, we've gone from a complete lockdown of society. It's been a 2-month turnaround essentially for China, particularly in Wuhan, from the 23rd of January. But reality was their impact was settling in a whole lot sooner before then, and a bit longer before Christmas, obviously. So the longer term impacts are really what we're starting to look at now, and shaping out what they look like and testing different outcomes will help you respond and react more quickly when everything starts to open up. So you do testing in multiple different ways, but testing yourself, testing with your clients, testing with some trusted friends, just having a chat with people becomes important, because it means that you're able to actually quickly test the assumptions that you've made around your plans and validate them quickly, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're spreading yourself too thin. And often we try and do everything and not do everything and not do much well. So the whole idea with an appropriate planning methodology, and then applying a bit of discipline around the way that you're working as a team and as a leadership group within your team, is that you're actually picking the right options and you're really focusing your efforts in on success that's going to matter for you and your business, so you can adapt to this current new normal. So that really concludes sort of more formal parts of the presentation, but I want to sort of share some resources with you that you can take away in your own workforce. So the plans, etc., that I've added there will be available to you. I've also more recently, just as part of my own adapt strategy, actually placed a lot of the training that I do normally deliver into a new online format. So I'm going to give access to you guys, an opportunity to access to you guys as well, and an early bird offer for that. So if there's something that you're interested in around crisis management, particularly introduction to crisis management training, it involves both the online training, which you can access for 6 months, but then also some other interactive sessions that I do over the next few weeks. So there'll be more of those opportunities as well for these types of webinars. So there's plenty of free resources. There's some other resources there for online training, or if you prefer as well, then I've been doing a lot of lately. It's been a lot of the online sort of or virtual crisis mentoring. So helping people, look at their plans from another perspective, help look at what the future options may look like, help facilitate their planning groups, or help facilitate and guide their crisis management process remotely. So all those things are obviously things that I do as part of my core business, but equally importantly, there's a lot of the free resources there that we'll make sure you have access to via email straight after this. The podcast is always there, so that's not going anywhere, and there's a few more episodes to follow on that one. So look forward to hopefully look forward to any feedback on that. And I've got the adaptive leadership blog and a few other things on my website as well. So all that stuff will be shared with all of you for participating. So that really concludes the more sort of formal part of it all. And I'll go into Q&A if I can get into there, or get Mel if you can come back online. And if there's any questions that I've got from the audience or the floor there, I'd love to hear. And we'll be able to open up now and unmute participants as well. So if you want to put your hand up or flag a question, then I'll unmute you off the panel here, and we should be able to share or hear your voice. No questions, but I did have a comment on how good the t-shirt looks. If you sign up to the training, then you get a t-shirt as well. I'll throw that one in as well there. But a few of you will be getting one regardless, so you know who you are, and I'll have some of those in the mail, so I'll get sizes of some of you guys anyway. So is there any other questions or any other Q&As there, or I can stay online, and if there's any flags that want to come up. Here we go. One question from Claire. What are you hearing from leaders you're working with about their own challenges, personal as well as business? So on the personal front, the challenges have been just the extreme workload. So they're tuning in, at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. If they've got international teams, it's obviously earlier, and they're really staying online. So it is like tank off the matrix in there, tuned in the whole day. Back to back, which I think is really creating that cognitive overload for a lot of people. So it means that they're not getting much time and space themselves to even brief out the problem. So that's one thing I'm seeing from leaders. The fact that they're physically disconnected as well means that situational awareness is eroded. So they're spending extra time and effort trying to communicate and over communicate, which again you normally wouldn't have when you've got a crisis room in play, for example. For the businesses themselves, it's one of the comments that came up earlier on. It's a sort of a two-speed economy. Most of them have addressed the immediate risks through cost reduction strategies. So that's been a real focal point, getting those into play very quickly. Understanding then the access to capital or access to lifeline that they're receiving from government. Managing regulatory constraints around movement, and then starting. They're really only emerging now to get their head up and think again forward around what the horizon may look like. But yeah, the horizons stuff actually is quite interesting, and that you'll see it in the one of the slides that I do send through to you guys. One of the matrices I did on the time and space analysis. Some of the future stuff actually looks quite interesting. So mining, for example, may look at it more of a throwback to remote living arrangements. So instead of FIFO, which they were heavily impacted by. So Hawks, you probably have a view on that, given the work that you guys do with them. The other one that you'll see is they're focused more on automation. Automation is not affected by people disruption. Automation is affected by cyber disruption, though. So not everything's without its risk, obviously, in the current environment. The other big concern that I'm seeing at the moment, though, is cyber issues and the security considerations for remote workers. So they're the big ones from business at the moment, and coming off the back of a global cyber attack with one of my clients previously. There is certainly challenges. Those challenges for businesses are going to be considerable going forward. My view on lower level coal-facing crisis planning, Simon, Hawks, I think that what we're finding again is that you because your leaders are often sort of tied up in these sort of back-to-backs or getting their way through the whole situation now, the ability then to communicate with the workers has been limited. So you find a lot of people are actually a bit more fearful, and I think Bill Bestick said it really well in my podcast with him. We were saying that the nursing staff that aren't engaged in the planning at the moment were at that particular point in time were really scared. So they were worried about the impacts. Whereas people are involved in the planning, you're working through it, you're planning your way through it, you're working out different options, you're heavily engaged in the problem. So the problem that creates for both leaders and for lower level crisis teams is, how do you communicate? So how do you keep that communication going so that you're not got people living in fear? You're giving the right assurance. Remember, the assure part of the adaptive leadership model, and And you've got that trust between the groups, and you're not doubling up on effort. So no one wants to do extra right now when they're doing so much anyway, and our work levels are way above sustainable levels. So we're not Michael Phelps. We can't keep swimming our way out of the wild river. Does this situation change the normal crisis planning response recovery curve, giving everyone is in crisis, not just individual business? Oh, it's really complex environment. Absolutely, it is a really complex environment. Yes, we are all affected by it, but at the end of the day, everyone is affected differently. And even then, some businesses are affected differently within their own business structures as well. So depending on the scale of your organization, you may have some parts of the business going gangbusters and the others really in hibernation or currently in a coma. So balancing those impacts and also picking over time becomes critical. At the end of the day, though, this process doesn't necessarily change. So creating a time and space for yourself as an individual to look at what these options may play out as, and start to shape towards what that plan would be becomes critical if you're a small business or a single shingle. The alternative is if you're a big business, you need to get a team very quickly together looking at those future horizons. So I'm working with a basketball club at the moment. So I work with a not-for-profit, I'm working for insurance, logistics, mining. Each have similar challenges because everyone's saying, well, when are we going to reopen? When are we going to restart? I think someone sent an email to, it was like a meme, so an email to the manager of coronavirus saying, when's this going to end? The reality is no one knows. What we can do is plan on what those preconditions are going to look like for us, look at those triggers for our decision making, and make sure that we're primed and aware and able to preempt them so we can react really quickly. So yeah, it's really important to have that process still activated and working through it, looking at the different iterations of problems. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you for a few others. And here we go, running a recovery planning session for senior tomorrow. What's your number one tip to keep it real and on track? A, have your own plan. B, have a strong agenda. That plan is the agenda that you're having and working towards. And C, knowing your technology. So if it is a remote session, then you need to know this tech so you're actually able to keep them going through. And D, you've got to play the arbitrator at different points in time and well and truly keep them on track, and help frame the decisions that you need from them. So for senior leadership teams, it's often nice to have one or two key decisions that you want to call out at the start that you need them to make at the end. And whether you're telling that in advance or you're facilitating that through and telling them at the start of the session, then the key is to get it out of them by the end so it keeps them focused on the problem. Righto, how do you stay motivated when you feel like there is roadblock after roadblock? Stacey, this is one of those ones that's certainly very challenging for individuals, and this is where there's often the underlying issues or underlying challenges that may impact your own bias, your own cognitive bias. So some of those are always going to be difficult, and part of those are about managing your health, managing your fatigue levels, managing your food intake, and managing yourself and your personal sort of components. So if you start to find that you're starting to drift off, then looking at your own health, exercise, and food and diet regime really comes critical. Having your own mental health support strategies around you become critical, and they're in any times, regardless of what it is that you're dealing with, but in these times become even more crucial to support yourself and your decision making. Obstacle after obstacle, and this is where the analogy of the river flowing comes into play. So if you're able to flow between problems quickly, then you can start to feel like you're advancing and you're moving forward through the issues. And part of this process, actually, by taking that step back or creating a bit of time and space for yourself, so is really to enable yourself to analyze what all those obstacles may be. So when you're looking at that, assess the situation, you're looking at what's the obstacles that are facing us out there. When we're in the analyze options space, we're looking at we're looking at the developing and designing the different scenarios. You're looking at what the issues that are out there, what are the risks, what are those obstacles that are going to be put in our place. So if you can start to identify them, at least you can have some more awareness around what they look like. And then, as Simon said before, you can do what if scenarios around it. Well, what if that happens? If that happens, I'm going to do this. So there's an action, and there's a reaction, and there's another action behind it. That in its own right starts to give you the motivation to start winning. You're winning these little battles. You start succeeding in these little battles. Then they start to build and build and build. And as you keep solving problem after problem, you get your ticket back into the race. So you're moving from that surviving mode up into steady. And as you start to feel steady, then you start to shape forward again further, and then start to look again at the next layer of problems. Some options might be to cut that away for your own benefit, and that may be looking at a completely different option for you down the track. But either way, getting the health, exercise, diet, getting your own welfare consideration in place first, and then looking at the other consideration around creating that time and space become critical. I'm conscious of time. There's another few minutes there. I'm happy to sort of take any further questions, but and I can see most of the guys are still on. A few have had to leave. But either way, I'll send through some details post this. We'll email out to you all a copy of the presentation. You'll have a copy of this recording. And look, I'll welcome any feedback at this time as well, or that time when you receive that note through from Mel. I think there's going to be a bit of a feedback form there as well. So if there's anything you can see that I could do to improve my presentation, first time using the webinar, I think I'll probably go for the meeting option next time, so we can do some breakouts, have a bit more interaction, because I like to have that interplay between us. So that'd be a big change for me. But at the end of the day, thank you very much for joining. I hope that you're able to get something out of the ADAPT methodology, and I hope it's something you can use to adapt to this changing environment. You'll see with the other resources that they may prove helpful in analysing some of the horizon risks for you. So feel free to use them. Feel free to share them. If you do, please, if you can, give some acknowledgement to otherwise feel free to use them in any way, shape or form as you see fit. Thank you, and great to see some of those names coming through, and look forward to keeping in touch and staying in contact with all of you. And at the moment, stay safe, stay well, love to your families, and stay connected with each other. There's definitely light at the end of the tunnel at the moment. So let's keep working towards those solutions to adapt through it. Thanks, guys.